Hi, I'm Indy, and this is another Great War exciting special episode of Out of the Trenches, where I sit here in the chair of wisdom and answer your questions about the First World War. Atle Reigstad from Patreon says, Hi Indy, did the German Submarine War change during the war? I heard that early in the war, the Germans boarded ships and scuttled them only if they carried goods headed for the enemy. Did the Q ships make them change this tactic? Okay, here's a rough look at the U-boats during the war. The first U-boat patrols in history were already happening in the first month of the war, but the first real success was the sinking of the HMS Pathfinder, and then a bunch more sinkings of armored cruisers and the battleship Formidable in September and October 1914. Now, at this time, surface ships had no way to detect a submerged ship and no way to attack one in any case. But a U-boat's torpedo could still sink a surface ship, so right away, they were really feared. But those early U-boats were nearly blind themselves underwater, and they were really slow. And they had to surface, to periscope level to attack. So even though they had some early success against warships, once warships, which were faster, realized that if they traveled quickly and traveled in a zigzag pattern, a zigzag course, they were basically invulnerable to U-boats, and they remained so for the rest of the war. The British blockade of Germany began just after the war broke out, and in November, Britain declared the North Sea to be a war zone, November 1914, and even included food transports as war contraband. Now, Germany responded to this in February 1915 by declaring the waters around Britain and Ireland a war zone, and said that any enemy ships in that zone, any ships whatsoever, would be destroyed, and that even neutral ships were at risk, so unrestricted submarine warfare was on. Of course, this led to the sinkings of the Lusitania and the Arabic, the passenger liners, which outraged neutral America because American citizens drowned and died, and this eventually caused Germany to cease targeting passenger ships without warning and without saving the crew and the passengers first. By this time, by say August 1915, German subs were laying mines around Britain and even penetrated the English Channel. That autumn, the autumn of 1915, in the Mediterranean actually, Germany had a bunch of success with U-boats and sank as many as 44 ships in 1 month down there, though the sinking of the Ancona caused sinking without warning to be abandoned. But what to do to defend against U-boats? Well, many merchant ships were, of course, advised to run, but also to try to ram the U-boat, and many were now armed, and soon there were heavily armed merchant ships where the weapons were hidden to lure U-boats to attack them. And these were Q ships. They were called Q ships because of the port in Queenstown, Ireland. And they were actually pretty ineffective compared with things like mines. In 1915, for example, Q ships sank 2 U-boats. So they did not make the Germans change any tactics at all. Convoys and escorts for the merchant ships were the best protection. Depth charges were introduced in 1916, but they took time to get going. In January 1917, Germany reintroduced unrestricted submarine warfare. Admiral von Holtzendorf thought, he figured, his plan, that if they sank 600,000 tons of British shipping a month, they could knock Britain out of the war in half a year. And even if it meant bringing the U.S. into the war would be over before the U.S. could really get going. But why now? Why January 1917? Well, they had considered it for a while, but the German land forces at that point, or just before that, had been stretched really thin. And they were actually not so much worried about the U.S. joining the war, they were more worried about neutral Holland or Denmark joining the war and just basically cruising to Berlin. But once Romania was defeated, spoiler alert, in December 1916, then that was no longer an issue. The resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare was a huge success for a few months. But by May, the Allies had totally adopted a convoy system, and they started destroying more and more U-boats. And Germany was facing labor and material shortages by then, and it took a long time to build new U-boats. Airplanes also became a big part of the countermeasures. Now, they were no good at attacking U-boats, but they forced the U-boats to submerge and hide or run the risk of the plane calling in warships. In 1918, not a single ship in any convoy escorted by planes was sunk by a U-boat. Also by 1918, U-boat losses were so appalling that was basically it. That was a long answer. Was that like a whole episode? Well, it could have been an hour longer. Look this stuff up. Let's see. Neil Brock from Patreon says, I see by your bio that you and I are around the same age, based on your graduation date from college. Can you recall ever meeting any of the veterans of World War I? Nope, none that I remember, and I think I would. And it's a shame because I'd love to have actually heard some first-hand stories while there were still living veterans. Okay, that's all for today. If you want to see our episode about the actual sinking of the Lusitania, you can click right here. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter for cool extra stuff. See you next time.